yesterday by DOJ.
He was asked a number of questions. He did not answer.
Right.
Well, our next guest, Ian Prior, served as DOJ spokesman when the special counsel began its probe, and he joins us now to weigh in on this. Good morning to you, Ian. Can you tell us what you expect to see today?
Sure. Well, I agree with former Attorney General Whitaker. I don't think you're going to see Bob Mueller go much outside of the scope, if at all, of the report. Look, he's been in public service for years. This is going to be his most high-profile congressional testimony. I think the last thing he wants to leave as a legacy is to be the next James Comey and violate all kinds of departmental rules and ethical rules by disclosing things that the president hasn't had the opportunity to assert privilege to.
Could he talk about how maybe if he feels frustrated during when the president lashed out and said witch hunt and Bob Mueller is compromised and rumors about him being fired? Could that get under him personally, and could he somehow lash out today in his statements?
I tend to doubt it. I think that is in the report. In the report, in part 2, they address all of those issues. I think he's going to stick to that report. I don't think he's going to go beyond it. But of course, as we know, Democrats are going to use this opportunity to put on film what was in the report. And that's going to serve two purposes. It's going to go to a perfectly willing media that's going to want to report everything as news, even if it's not new. And also, it's going to give video fodder for political ads next fall in 2020 to have Bob Mueller on television repeating the things that were in the report, even if ultimately nothing came of that report.
Wait a minute, Ian. So essentially you're saying, it's like first somebody writes a book and then it becomes a movie. The book's already been written and he's going to stay within the four corners of that. And the Democrats and the Republicans just want to hear him say those words out loud.
That's absolutely correct. And look, there were stories written this morning where Democrats said, some unnamed Democrat said, nobody reads the book, everybody wants to watch the movie. So that is what Democrats are counting on. Mm-hmm. Now, ultimately, look, the political class, Washington, D.C., the media, they're all going to be watching this. But most Americans, they've heard about the Mueller report. Yeah. They know what's going on. They're not going to be spending their time watching this hearing. So I think most of it's going to fall on deaf ears at this point in time with Americans, out there that have other things to do.
Right. It's going to be a long movie, 5 hours, maybe 5.5 hours. Any bombshells that you're expecting today?
I don't expect any bombshells. I do find it interesting that we have this last-minute addition for the deputy special counsel to come in and testify. I think the fact that that came just recently tells me that probably during the preparation for this hearing, Mueller, who supervised 20 attorneys, maybe wasn't ready to answer all the questions because he didn't supervise as much as people thought he did. So they had to bring this individual in at the last minute that would be able to answer questions that Mueller himself just wasn't answering very well during prep.
So it's the Mueller report, but Mr. Mueller might not have all the details that the congressmen want.
I think that's right. And I think there have been stories over the past year and a half where a lot of interviews, Mueller wasn't present. Sometimes he'd pop in for a minute here and there. But I don't think that he did really day-to-day supervision. I think he was the figurehead of this team. I think he put together the team. But I think most of the work was done by others. And that's why you have this deputy special counsel that's going to be there under oath.
So the thing is, if you're going to be effective with 5 minutes, Ian, if I was to give you 5 minutes to question Mueller and you want to be as effective as possible, give me an idea of what you would ask, for example, from the Republican side.
Well, from the Republican side, I'd want to know, look, you were tasked with investigating Russian interference with elections. You had Hillary Clinton through a variety of different levels getting information from Russian nationals that was used to put out disinformation in the Steele dossier to go after your political opponent. Why wasn't that investigated? Did you have conversations with Department of Justice that said that was off the table? If you're a Democrat, you're going to want to get after that part too. Why did you not make a recommendation on obstruction of justice? Was it because of that Department of Justice rule? And you're going to hammer on that repeatedly.
Yeah, Mr. Barr had to make the decision, but a lot of people were indicted. Michael Flynn, George Papadopoulos, Rick Gates, Paul Manafort, Michael Cohen, and Roger Stone.
Yeah, but not for collusion.
Correct. James Comey said that if he weren't the president, he would have been indicted, President Trump, because you can't indict a sitting president. But we just had Matt Whitaker on, who was the acting AG for a time. He read the entire report, and he said if you look at those 10 points, they were questioning whether or not there was obstruction. He said he did not commit a crime. Do you agree?
I do agree. I think, first of all, the fact that there was no underlying crime. The whole thing was about Russian conspiracy. Was there a Russian conspiracy with the campaign? The answer was no. All those other indictments were really process crimes, right? So then you get to the actual obstruction. You don't have the underlying crime. And then you look at the things that we're talking about, and I just don't see that you could take those facts and prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the president committed obstruction of justice. You just can't do it.
Right, Ian, and by the way, you're splitting the screen with Robert Mueller, who's now inside the building, surrounded, obviously, by security.
That's right.
Making his way through. He's done this over 70 times. He's testified, but nothing quite like this. He'll do it twice today.
I think they probably take him to a holding room, and then he will come out in about 10 minutes. Before you go, at the end of the day, Ian Prior, would you be surprised if the electrifying sound bites are actually the questions that the congressmen and women ask and not his answers?
Oh, of course. It's like being an attorney and cross-examination. You don't care about the answer. You care about the question. And the questioners, it's all political. They want to get on TV. They want to get their sound bites in, and they want to be the ones driving the narrative, not letting Bob Mueller stick to the script.
All right. Ian Prior, former Department of Justice Deputy Director of Public Affairs. Sir, thank you very much for sharing your time with us today.
Thanks for having me.
All right. It is 8 o'clock in New York City and Washington, D.C. as well. And it's a Fox News alert because, as you've been watching, Robert Mueller has arrived on Capitol Hill for the hearings on the Russia probe, which will be starting minutes from now.
Catherine Herridge is live inside the Rayburn House, the office building where he is, and she is there telling us what we can expect. Good morning, Catherine.
Well, good morning. Former Special Counsel Robert Mueller arrived here a short time ago on Capitol Hill with a heavy security presence surrounded by Capitol Hill police. His personal attorney, Aaron Zelby, arrived separately, and based on our reporting, we believe they are being held in an anteroom before entering the Judiciary Committee panel. I've been inside that hearing room, and at the witness table, there are 2 chairs, and that is not standard for these congressional hearings. They have a saying here on Capitol Hill that there are 3 Ps: policy, politics, and procedure. When it comes to the first 2, lawmakers have a lot of latitude, but on the last one, procedure, they have none. So today, place close attention to something called House Rule 11, subsection 2. And what it states is that a witness can have counsel present to advise them of their constitutional rights. It says nothing about a lawyer being at the witness table and helping refresh the witness's memory or provide insight for their testimony. What we heard clearly from Republicans and Democrats is that they want Robert Mueller to answer the questions himself. This morning at Judiciary, it will focus on obstruction. This afternoon, it will focus on allegations of Russian interference and contact between members of the Trump campaign and Russian officials. But it's important to emphasize that in both cases, no criminal charges were brought. Back to you.
All right, Catherine, thank you very much. Let's bring in Rudy Giuliani,
You're
President
welcome.
Trump's attorney, former mayor of the great city of New York. Good morning to you, Rudy.
Good morning.
How are you?
Doing okay. The president has been very busy. I'm looking. He's been firing up all sorts of things. He's talking about. It's been reported Robert Mueller is saying that he did not apply to interview for the job of FBI director, but Mike Pence was there. No collusion, no obstruction is the very latest tweet the president sent out 5 minutes ago.
Well, that sounds like the conclusion of the of the analysis of the case. There was definitively no collusion. He extraordinarily couldn't reach a decision on obstruction. Of course, he was paid to reach a decision, but he punted it. I think he should give back half his money because he only did half the case. And then Barr should get the rest because Barr had to make the rest of the decision along with the deputy attorney.
What, you're saying he cleaned it up?
Yeah, he cleaned it up. He made the obvious decision. I mean, the analysis of obstruction would be an embarrassment for a serious prosecutor. That somehow you obstructed a case where you didn't commit the underlying crime, where you have to be deemed to be innocent of that, and you're defending yourself against his witch hunt, which is now falling apart. Last 2 days, John Solomon, who should get the Pulitzer Prize and then turn it down, and he reported that Andrew Weissman, on at least 3 occasions, came this close to suborning perjury, if he didn't suborn perjury.
Because he reached out to a Ukrainian.
How about he's on the job for
oligarch.
2 weeks. He doesn't even know the case. He reaches out to one of the most notorious wanted criminals, a Ukrainian oligarch who's evading extradition for 4 years, represented by Lanny Davis, by the way, and making millions from the oligarch. And he tells the oligarch what to say. He says, I'll get all the cases dropped. Don't worry. I can take care of those 2 U.S. Attorney's offices. If you say the following, if you give me dirt on Trump and Manafort, and Manafort was the connection, wasn't he? That's why he kept Manafort in solitary confinement for 7 months. I was on this show many times complaining about that. He called Manafort in the office. He'd give him a script. He would tell Manafort the key to getting out of solitary confinement. To me, that's suborning perjury.
That's
what did this guy do about it? Did he know about it? Did he know anything? Did he know about Strzok? When he fired Strzok, had he read what Strzok had said about Trump? And then did he go back and investigate the entire investigation that Strzok had conducted for a year? Did he realize when he took over that Strzok had cleared the president of collusion? He told his girlfriend, there's no there, and then they started a $35 million investigation on no there.
Rudy, it sounds like, they're
You owe us money, Bob.
He's going to have his chief of staff for the investigation sit next to him.
Aaron Zebley.
Because as we just heard from Ian Pryor, he was kind of a hands-off guy. He probably doesn't know a lot that happened.
Saw him once. Showed up once. Kind of made an idiot out of himself. Didn't know stuff. I was shocked. I called John Dowd later. I said, I remember this guy 20, 30 years ago. What's happened to him? He said, he doesn't pay much attention to it.
Well,
he was the Wizard of Oz. He's behind a curtain. From then on, it was, we'll take it to Bob. We'll ask Bob. After a while, I would say, don't bother. I mean, you guys are deciding. Don't bullshit. Don't tell me.
Good save. Whoa. What was your reaction when you heard that Aaron Zebley was going to go in with him, that unexpected?
Well, first question, is that your lawyer? You represented? You have attorney-client privilege. What's he doing here? They need another witness? I mean, the Democrats are such idiots. They call him to testify, and now he's going to have a mouthpiece to help him.
Well, let me ask
this guy was the director of the FBI.
Well,
he was the special prosecutor or whatever the heck he was. He was really the Wizard of Oz. He can't testify. I mean, I'd be embarrassed.
So help us
to
out
have
with
somebody
this.
to lean on, because I'm afraid the Republicans are going to find out how much I didn't know. And you know what's going to happen in the next 2 to 3 months? We're going to find out that there is a crime that was committed. It's called conspiracy with Ukrainians, with people in the UK, with people in Italy, on Mifsud. Total counterintelligence scam job. Organized by somebody. Mueller never even bothered to find out.
Well,
Mueller's report on Mifsud is totally erroneous, like half of that report, and the rest of it's exaggerated.
You mean the Malta guy they say
the guy was a counterintelligence operative of Italy, of Malta, of the UK,
professor,
not of Russia, as he falsely put in the report.
Right.
Too bad it's not under oath.
A couple of things. Could you just describe to me what Zebley could be doing? Like, Mueller wanted him sworn in. So is he there to say, I was there every step of the way, I hired the people, I was in on all the meetings? Or does he just look out for Robert Mueller's legal interests?
You tell me. I don't know what he's doing there. Maybe he just hold his hand under the table.
If he doesn't get sworn in, what does that
Maybe
tell
when
you?
he gets nervous, or when he has to can't
if he
read
doesn't
his
get
paper
sworn
anymore.
in, what does it
I mean,
tell
he read that whole nine and a half minute statement.
Yeah.
So maybe when he gets a little flustered about not knowing a darn thing about Strzok. Look, I don't think Bob's a bad guy. I think he's out to lunch. And I think he had a lot of really bad guys working with him. This guy, Weissman, is a terror. It's now been exposed. He did it with Manafort. He did it with Corsi. And he did it with Firtash. The guy's name is Firtash. Oh, by the way, the notorious terrible, if he is that terrible, Ukrainian oligarch wouldn't tell slimy little Weissman what Weissman wanted to know.
Rudy, you're talking about so many...
Go stuff it, I won't lie.
Rudy,
even crooks have honor.
Rudy,
sometimes slimy prosecutors don't.
You're including so many details that the average person doesn't know about. You're an expert when it comes to this particular kind of thing, though. So when they're asking all these questions of Mr. Mueller today, and if he says, I don't really have the answer to that, we're going to have the investigation from Mr. Horowitz come out. Is that when you think a lot?
No, I don't think today is just about today and how it's not like a 10-round fight. This is going to the election. So if the Democrats are there doing sound bites, which is why they put makeup on and rehearse.
Right.
They're rehearsing.
Yesterday.
Well, I mean, Nadler needs to rehearse, frankly. I mean, I'm sure it's all written out for him. He's trying to memorize it right now.
Years.
I know Jerry. Yeah. And then the president was going to get impeached the day he walked in. He didn't need any facts. Impeach him. He was on the train talking about planning impeachment before the report was out.
We're not going to hear anything really today.
No,
he's going to.
We're going for sound bites, aren't we? You had a guy on just a few minutes ago, absolutely right on the money. The Democrats are going for sound bites for the election. Mueller saying, obstruction of justice. You cut everything out. Obstruction of justice, which the guy will say obstruction of justice. Obstruction of justice. Did you decide it? No. Then we'll have that sound bite. So it's our sound bites, their sound bites, and then maybe some evidence that can help the investigation that is now very active.
Right.
Of the conspiracy to frame Donald Trump Jr., which began probably as early as December of 2015, was hatched somewhere in Washington, transmitted to the UK, transmitted to the Ukrainian embassy in Ukraine, in Kiev, with the participation of the people in the State Department. I know their names. I got transcripts of it. If he doesn't bring it out, we'll bring it out. But I know it's coming out. This is going to be a tragic misuse of our government in order to stop a man from being president and then to take a president down illegally.
And I have something to add to that. There's a report
out today. I don't care if you don't like Donald Trump or not. Right. If you like this country, these people committed probably one of the worst conspiracies, at least in modern times.
Well, how about this? 2 U.S. officials briefed on the IG report that's coming out. They have possible FBI misconduct from James Comey. He was essentially running, quote, a covert operation against the president with a private defense briefing he gave Trump just weeks before the inauguration, that he was running an operation.
Well, if I were questioning him today, I wouldn't be playing for today. I'd be playing for the indictments, hopefully, that are going to come in the next month, 2 months, 3 months for the grand jury.
Who's being indicted?
Well, I don't know who's being indicted. I don't know. I can tell you who I think are being asked about. Peter Strzok, Nellie Orr, Bruce Orr, Comey, McCabe. I don't know. Did it go higher? I'd have to leave that open as a prosecutor. Was this Comey's idea? Or could it have come from a counterintelligence person, since it involved UK intelligence, Australian intelligence, Italian intelligence,
like who?
And Ukrainian? I don't know. I'd have to go look at the organization chart and see who was in charge of counterintelligence. Who could figure out how to feed a story to Mifsud that has no basis in fact, and then give that story to set up Papadopoulos, who was down here on the campaign, who they tried to elevate up to here.
CIA?
I'm not trying to demean him. The guy's an honest, decent guy who was horribly... But the guy wasn't an intimate of Donald Trump. It was ridiculous from day one that he was the guy that was going to talk to Putin.
What do you want? What do you want?
It would mean Donald Trump is willing to do an international conspiracy with a guy he never met.
What do you want the Republicans to ask? We know what the Democrats are going to focus on.
I want him to ask fairly detailed questions about what he knew, when he knew it, when did he find out there was no collusion, how come we had another year of investigation after that? Did you supervise Weissman? Did you know that Manafort was in solitary confinement and being called in for questioning, and then being put back in solitary confinement, being told that his questions were inadequate, and then being told what he would say, which, by the way, is remarkably similar to what he did with Firtash, and exactly the same as he did to Corsi. And after the second one or the third one, did you think you had a guy who was trying to suborn perjury because he was so out of his mind in love with Hillary Clinton that he cried at her loss party, and has been cited by the Supreme Court of the United States and the Justice Department for being an unethical prosecutor? Why did you hire him in the first place? He fouled up the entire case against Arthur Anderson, had 4 innocent people in jail.
Andrew
You put this hitman, and you don't know his record.
So one of the questions you would put out there
is why he did that.
So many Democrats?
And why did he select someone who was the chief counsel of the Clinton Foundation? Because he knew that a compliant, corrupt press wouldn't say a damn thing about it. If I did it, if I were to investigate Hillary Clinton and I picked the head of the Trump Foundation to be my chief lawyer, I'd be asked to resign, I'd be indicted, I'd be impeached.
So that would be one of the questions.
And the New York Times would go after me for 10 days until I was out. Because it would be unethical for me to. Well, it's just as unethical for Bob Mueller to do it.
Mayor, we were never supposed to get this far because Hillary Clinton was going to win the presidency. We would never have known about it.
Well, you could ask him, did you ever bother to inquire about your chief investigator that he fixed a case against Hillary Clinton? And that's the reason why he said those ridiculous, out-of-bounds things about Trump to his girlfriend. And, Bob, what happened to all their tapes or their texts? What happened to them?
Where are the phones?
Yeah, every single text between his girlfriend and Strzok, the completely illicit investigator, have been destroyed, Bob. Hey, the only obstruction in this case is you. The president obstructed nothing.
Mr. Mayor,
he thought about obstruction. He may have obstructed. He possibly obstructed. You obstructed. You wiped out texts of a guy who's under investigation for trying to fix a case against the president of the United States, is in a text, says he's fixing a case. I'm going to prevent him. I'm going to stop him. And those tapes are gone. We'll never know what Orr was texting to his girlfriend during the course of your investigation. Maybe it might incriminate some of your assistants, Bob. Maybe that's
You mean
why
when
they got
Strzok
rid.
was texting to his girlfriend?
Yeah,
not
somebody in his
not-
office erased all those. By the way, listen to them. We've never put that person under oath. So somebody listen to them. I'd like to be appointed to question him or her. Did you listen to them? What did they say? What do you remember?
Yeah.
Right. How many were there?
Well, Michael Horowitz is the one
Seems
who
to be-
found the text,
seems
right?
to be
Michael
there was
Horowitz,
a
the
year
Inspector
ago.
General. The Inspector General.
Well, I
is the one
hope
who
he's
found the
doing
text.
that. I hope he worked in the U.S. Attorney's
Is the
Office that I
president-
ran, and they were trained to be dogged investigators. So,
Rudy-
let's hope let's hope that person is put under oath and is asked to recall everything they wiped out and why they wiped it out.
President's going to this fundraising event in West Virginia today. Do you think when he's walking through the lawn, he'll talk to reporters?
What do you think?
I think he will.
We can't bet on national television, but I wouldn't want to take the wrong side of that bet. I think he'll have plenty to say about it, and God bless him, he should.
Right.
If I were President Trump
Quickly.
once said to me, I hope he doesn't mind me sharing this.
10 seconds.
Hey, I wouldn't be so mad if I had done something, but I didn't do anything. Damn it, I didn't do anything. But this is bad for the Republic, not just for Donald Trump.
And it's all
Must be
going to
rooted
start
out.
here.
Never again.
It's going to start,
Mr.
Rudy, in
Mayor. Thanks so
15
much.
minutes, and you'll see it live. Special coverage of Robert Mueller's testimony with Brett Baier and Martha MacCallum, live from Washington. As you can see, inside the committee hearing room there in the Rayburn office building on Capitol Hill, our coverage starts right now.
This is a Fox News alert. We are moments away from a hearing on Capitol Hill, more than 2 years in the making. For the very first time, lawmakers will have a chance to question Bob Mueller in a public hearing about his report on Russian interference in the 2016 election. Welcome to special coverage in Washington. I'm Brett Baier.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Martha MacCallum. We will have a live look, as you've been getting this morning, inside the hearing room at the Rayburn building here on Capitol Hill as we wait for former special counsel Robert Mueller to take his seat. The House Judiciary Committee will get the first crack at the questions in just a few minutes. Democratic Chairman Jerry Nadler will gavel in at 8:30, and we do expect that the first hearing is going to go about 3 hours today.
It'll be a long day, folks. There's a short lunch break scheduled for 11:30. The Intelligence Committee, led by Adam Schiff, will get its turn to question Mueller at noon. That hearing is expected to last another 2 hours. And the big question here is what comes out of this. Democrats are hoping that Bob Mueller will educate the American public who maybe didn't read this report. A lot of people didn't. Republicans are hoping it falls flat or they learn something else about the origins of this probe.
So let's bring in Chris Wallace, anchor of Fox News Sunday, Juan Williams, co-host of The Five, and Fox News political analyst, Katie Pavlich, the editor of townhall.com and Fox News contributor, and Andy McCarthy, former assistant U.S. attorney and also a Fox News contributor. You know, I mean, one of the big things here, and Chris, let me start with you, is whether or not there's any daylight between what Robert Mueller wants to say today and how Bill Barr interpreted his report. In many ways, I think we're going to be watching the dynamic and what we've heard from these two men this morning.
Well, I am here armed with my copy, my dog-eared copy of the Mueller report, and we're told that Robert Mueller has said, I'm going to stick to the four corners of each page of this report. And in fact, he even asked for guidance from the Justice Department, and that's what they told him. Stick to the report. Don't talk about things outside the report. Don't talk about prosecutorial decisions. Stick to what you said in the 488 pages of this report. Now, there are some differences between what Mueller says was in the report and what Barr says was in the report. We saw that with that letter that Mueller sent to Barr after Barr's initial letter saying, I don't think that you've captured, particularly in the issue of obstruction, the full breadth of what we were trying to say. But, you know, I think going in, we have to be honest. You can't expect much from this report. Mueller doesn't want to testify. He said, my report is my testimony. The Justice Department has told him not to go beyond that. Having said that, and this incidentally is the 89th time that Robert Mueller has testified, going back all the way to 1990. So he's pretty experienced in this, and generally speaking, very disciplined, very controlled, but occasionally snaps back. And that's what I'm going to be looking for and that's why we all got into this business, because sometimes these guys go off script. We got to hope that's what happens today.
You know, one controversy late in that Aaron Zebley, the deputy special counsel, longtime aide to Robert Mueller, will be with him at the desk. He's not speaking, testifying in the first hearing, but will be sworn in the second hearing to do so. The president tweeting 5 times this morning, once about this. It was never agreed that Robert Mueller could use one of his many Democrat never-Trumper lawyers to sit next to him to help him with his answers. This was specifically not agreed to, and I would never have agreed to it. The greatest witch hunt in U.S. history by far. The tweets kind of match that sentiment, as you can imagine, from last night and this morning.
He's been very busy this morning on Twitter and very clear that he's not happy that Mueller is testifying. And I think that's a puzzle to lots of people, but especially from the Democratic perspective, the question is, if you go around saying no obstruction, no collusion, based on the Mueller report, why wouldn't you want Mueller there? And this question of having Mueller's assistant there, I think Mueller's in his mid-70s. He wants somebody there simply to remind him of the contents of that more than 450-page report. But the Justice Department, in fact, discouraged just this arrangement and has sent a letter, as we mentioned, as Chris mentioned, indicating that Mr. Mueller should stick to the 4 corners of the report.
At Mueller's request, yes, according to the Attorney General.
But I would say that this is a moment in which history has a ring to it, because although I don't expect any grand revelation, I do think you think back to John Dean in terms of the 70s. I think you think back to Oliver North in the 80s. Even Ken Starr in the 90s when he was the prosecutor on the Clinton case. He was constantly in front of the cameras, and it brought this to life. The cliche around town is you may not have read the book, but you've got to see the movie.
Katie Pavlich, one of the most important viewers of all of this morning may be Nancy Pelosi, who has pushed back on her party's desire to impeach. If this turns out to be something that's going to be very useful fodder on the impeachment front, that's going to be a decision that she's going to be confronted with once again.
Yeah, Martha, that's a very good point. And just last week, we had Democrats, 95 of them voting to try and move impeachment forward. You had 137 Democrats voting with Republicans to stave off impeachment. Nancy Pelosi again caught in the middle of all this. And the question today is going to be, does this move the needle politically? And if you look at the polling shortly after the Mueller report was released, Republicans actually said that they have more credibility. They actually trusted Robert Mueller more, and Democrats lost some faith in him. If you look at the polling today, a Morning Consult political poll is out showing that there's an even split now, 42% among Republicans, 42% among Democrats, about seeing this process unfairly. So some of the questions today are going to be about personnel. Who was working on this investigation? What was their background? How did you investigate? Did you try to make sure there was a political balance when it came to investigating such a politically heavy topic? But when it comes to moving forward and whether this is going to work out in favor of Democrats and their impeachment cause, 5% ahead of everyone else in terms of this poll shows that people are now more skeptical of how this investigation started, which we'll find out with the Inspector General report later, than they have questions about obstruction or collusion in terms of the Mueller investigation.
Andy, we've talked about staying within the lines here and what has been said by the DOJ, but let's hear Bob Mueller himself when he talked to reporters at the end of May about this very possibility.
There has been discussion about an appearance before Congress. Any testimony from this office would not go beyond our report. It contains our findings and analysis and the reasons for the decisions we made. We chose those words carefully, and the work speaks for itself. And the report is my testimony. I would not provide information beyond that which is already public in any appearance before Congress.
So Democrats are hoping, okay, we'll take that.
I don't think so. I think what they want is for him to go importantly beyond the report and say that the Office of Legal Counsel guidance is essentially the reason that he did not recommend charges against President Trump. Now, he's not going to do that. He's going to stick to the 4 corners of the report. When he made those statements that we just played, I thought that was pretty presumptuous. As Mueller knows, as a very experienced lawyer, the witness doesn't get to tell the tribunal what the confines of the questioning are. The problem is that this is not a courtroom. It's Congress, and there's no judge there to tell him to answer the questions. And there's really not a lot of political pressure, I think, on him or the Justice Department to be cooperative, because once the collusion story collapsed, I just don't think the public is as interested in the obstruction angle.
Chris, you know, there's the question that Andy talks about with this OLC decision, whether or not it's even ever possible to indict a sitting president is going to be a big issue today, because the Attorney General and the Department of Justice has maintained that on several occasions, Robert Mueller made it clear to them that the decisions that he reached in his report were separate from the OLC. Now the interpretation appears to be that in the media and in the discussion of this, that of course he would have indicted him, and the only reason he didn't was because he was the president of the United States. That's a pointed question that he could be asked today, and I think it's going to be very interesting to see what his answer to that is.
Yeah, well, I think if you read the report, he makes it pretty clear that he was guided in his decision not to bring charges or to say that the president had committed a crime by the OLC guideline, which this is an Office of Legal Counsel. It's in effect the lawyer for the Justice Department, and they say that a sitting president cannot be indicted. And then there was the question about, well, could you say he committed a crime? And he said that's not fair, because if there's not going to be a trial, you shouldn't, and there's not an opportunity for him to clear his name, we shouldn't even make that charge. That'll certainly be a question he's asked. If he weren't the president and he had done these things, would you have charged him if you're anybody but the president? There are other questions, and Neil Katyal, who was the former acting Solicitor General in the Obama administration, has a few, which are kind of negative questions, like, did your report find there was no coordination between the Trump campaign and Russia? Did you find that there was no obstruction of justice? Basically, flip it on its head and ask him the negative, because the president, of course, has said, I was completely exonerated, and see how he answers those questions. But again, this is going to be, I think, to a certain degree, and Mueller is a very skilled lawyer, and as we know, with all due regard to Andrew McCarthy, lawyers are very good at parsing words and finding indirect ways out of very direct questions. So I suspect, and particularly with a 5-minute limit on what each of the congressmen can ask, that he's going to be able, if he wants to avoid giving direct answers to direct questions.
You know, it's important to point out that he could have moved forward with indictments on the conspiracy or obstruction on someone else besides the president, and he did not do that at all. The other thing is the delay in setting this all up was because all members wanted to be a part of it. The question whether all members will have equal time in questioning, we don't know until this whole thing plays out. Katie, the other side of it is Republicans asking about the government's activities. The Attorney General weighed in on that with an interview with Bill Hemmer. Take a listen.
The fact of the matter is, Bob Mueller did not look at the government's activities. He was looking at whether or not the Trump campaign had conspired with the Russians. But he was not going back and looking at the counterintelligence program. And we have a number of investigations underway that touch upon it, the main one being the Office of Inspector General that's looking at the FISA warrants. But as far as I'm aware, no one has really looked across the whole waterfront.
So there are a couple of investigations. A lot of people wondering when all of that is coming to fruition. But you may hear some of that today, too.
Yeah, and many Republican congressmen and women will be asking why there may have been a double standard when it came to this investigation. You know, the Democrats and the Mueller team have argued that there were indictments that were made on crimes that were not about collusion or obstruction. They are about financial crimes or lying to the FBI, because if you're a prosecutor and you find something, you have to go after it. Well, that's a question that they want answered when it comes to the origins of this probe. And if you look at the polling, again, politically, people are very concerned about the abuse at the FBI, the government using political opposition research in the dossier, which, by the way, in the Mueller report, they say is not a credible document. They say is uncorroborated, not credible in the reports. And the question becomes, why was it possibly used to start the investigation? One question I think Republicans should ask is, was any of the information that you may have come across in your investigation now, has it been relayed to the Inspector General for him to now investigate if it wasn't part of your investigation into the 2016 election?
Andy, one of the things that strikes me is when you look back at the summary that came out from Attorney General Barr, and then you look at the response to that, right? So that provoked a moment of response. It was a rare moment of response from Robert Mueller, where he said that he didn't believe that the summary accurately reflected the content of his report. Today provides a moment for him to elucidate us a bit on that. And I know that the belief is that he's not going to say anything outside of these pages, but clearly he felt that it was inaccurately presented in some way. This may be the only chance he gets to explain what he meant by that.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, Barr was pretty emphatic that what he was trying to do was not summarize the 448-page report. What he's basically saying is he's like the statistician who gives you the box score. He's giving you the bottom line of what the findings were. Whereas I think Mueller thought that providing that in such a dry way did not provide the flavor of the report. And I think this is inappropriate for prosecutors, but he really wants to flip the burden of proof and say to the public, well, yes, the bottom line is I didn't find charges, but I didn't exonerate him either. Now, to me, that's not the prosecutor's place. The prosecutor's place is to say there is either sufficient evidence to charge or there's not. And generally speaking, if there's not, you say nothing. And if Congress wants to pursue it, they can. But obviously, he saw it a different way.
I just want to follow up on that because I think it's significant that Aaron Zebley is going to be sitting next to him because the team in this whole situation has also had a voice to Robert Mueller, right? They're not satisfied with the summary that came out from Bill Barr. So now you've got Aaron Zebley sitting right next to him. They want, perhaps, to make sure that their understanding of what their work produced is clear to the American people.
Well, that's what they want. I think that what they should be concerned about, though, is what that looks like. I mean, we've had a lot of commentary about Mueller being very staff-driven and that he was kind of a detached. Some of the lawyers who worked on the case have said that basically he was detached, he was not hands-on, his staff ran everything, while President Trump tweets about the staff being a bunch of angry Democrats, right? So having him there, and look, I testified in front of this committee like 3 weeks ago. You don't usually get to have somebody there to help you along. I don't think it's a great look for him.
There's House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jerry Nadler as the rest of the committee starts filing in here in the Rayburn House office building, getting underway in just a minute. Juan, we have a poll just out that says, a Fox News poll, the chance that Mueller testimony could change your mind about President Trump. None, 49% across the board. If you break that up, Democrat and Republican, there's still not a lot of change that they believe is going to come out of this hearing, which is interesting. But one thing that will come out, no matter what, no matter you're Democrat or Republican, is what Russia did, what they tried to do, and a focus on perhaps trying to prevent them from doing it again, because it's significant in these 400 plus pages of the Mueller report.
Without a doubt. And in fact, I would say that's the principal finding of the Mueller report, is that Russia conducted an extensive effort to interfere in the 2016 election, that it was a multi-million-dollar effort with hundreds of people. There's Mueller coming into the room. And I think it's, while we will begin with a focus on things like why no Trump interview, why no Trump Jr. interview, can Trump be indicted after leaving office, we don't know if we get answers to those questions. But I think on the one point that Mueller will be forthcoming extensively on, and a repeat of what he said in his brief press conference, is that Russia aggressively interfered to try to help one candidate and damage another in the 2016 election.
I just want to mention that we just found out yesterday or the day before maybe that Robert Mueller did plan to make an opening statement here today. That's another opportunity for us to sort of get a sense for his feeling, for lack of a better word, about this whole process and this report. And he has not shared that opening statement with the Department of Justice. So they do not know what he will say in moments.
This is a big moment. And we talk about the Trump administration. A lot of moments make up the Trump administration. Sometimes it's tweet to tweet. But as you look at this, this is a big moment. Let's listen into the House Judiciary Committee.
Manafort downloaded encrypted communication apps on the date.
That was just a protester weighing in. I think the special counsel will be sworn in here.
Sherry, I think you'd wait for someone to say something first. The camera's
Judiciary Committee will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recesses of the committee at any time. We welcome everyone to today's hearing on oversight of the report on the investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election. I will now recognize myself for a brief opening statement. Director Mueller, thank you for being here. I want to say just a few words about our themes today: responsibility, integrity, and accountability. Your career, for example, is a model of responsibility. You are a decorated Marine officer. You were awarded a Purple Heart and the Bronze Star for Valor in Vietnam. You served in senior roles at the Department of Justice, and in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, you served as director of the FBI. 2 years ago, you returned to public service to lead the investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 elections. You conducted that investigation with remarkable integrity. For 22 months, you never commented in public about your work, even when you were subjected to repeated and grossly unfair personal attacks. Instead, your indictments spoke for you, and in astonishing detail. Over the course of your investigation, you obtained criminal indictments against 37 people and entities. You secured the conviction of President Trump's campaign chairman, his deputy campaign manager, his national security advisor, and his personal lawyer, among others. In the Paul Manafort case alone, you recovered as much as $42 million, so that the cost of your investigation to the taxpayers approaches zero. And in your report, you offer the country accountability as well. In Volume 1, you find that the Russian government attacked our 2016 elections, quote, in a sweeping and systematic fashion, and that the attacks were designed to benefit the Trump campaign. Volume 2 walks us through 10 separate incidents of possible obstruction of justice, where, in your words, President Trump attempted to exert undue influence over your investigation. The president's behavior included, and I quote from your report, quote, public attacks on the investigation, non-public efforts to control it, and efforts in both public and private to encourage witnesses not to cooperate, close quote. Among the most shocking of these incidents, President Trump ordered his White House counsel to have you fired, and then to lie and deny that it had happened. He ordered his former campaign manager to convince the recused Attorney General to step in and limit your work. And he attempted to prevent witnesses from cooperating with your investigation. Although department policy barred you from indicting the president for this conduct, you made clear that he is not exonerated. Any other person who acted in this way would have been charged with crimes. And in this nation, not even the president is above the law. Which brings me to this committee's work: responsibility, integrity, and accountability. These are the marks by which we who serve on this committee will be measured as well. Director Mueller, we have a responsibility to address the evidence that you have uncovered. You recognize as much when you said, quote, the Constitution requires a process other than the criminal justice system to formally accuse a sitting president of wrongdoing, close quote. That process begins with the work of this committee. We will follow your example, Director Mueller. We will act with integrity. We will follow the facts where they lead. We will consider all appropriate remedies. We will make our recommendation to the House when our work concludes. We will do this work because there must be accountability for the conduct described in your report, especially as it relates to the President. Thank you again, Director Mueller. We look forward to your testimony. It is now my pleasure to recognize the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Mueller, for being here. For 2 years leading up to the release of the Mueller report, and in the 3 months since, Americans were first told what to expect and then what to believe. Collusion, we were told, was in plain sight, even if the special counsel's team didn't find it. When Mr. Mueller produced his report and Attorney General Barr provided it to every American, we read no American conspired with Russia to interfere in our elections, but learned the depths of Russia's malice toward America. We are here to ask serious questions about Mr. Mueller's work, and we will do that. After an extended, unhampered investigation, today marks an end to Mr. Mueller's involvement in an investigation that closed in April. The burden of proof for accusations that remain unproven is extremely high, and especially in light of the special counsel's thoroughness. We are told this investigation began as an inquiry into whether Russia meddled in our 2016 election. Mr. Mueller, you concluded they did. Russians accessed Democrat servers and disseminated sensitive information by tricking campaign insiders into revealing protected information. The investigation also reviewed whether Donald Trump, the president, sought Russian assistance as a candidate to win the presidency. Mr. Mueller concluded he did not. His family or advisors did not. In fact, the report concludes no one in the president's campaign colluded, collaborated, or conspired with the Russians. The president watched the public narrative surrounding this investigation, assume his guilt while he knew the extent of his innocence. Volume 2 of Mr. Mueller's report details the president's reaction to frustrating investigation where his innocence was established early on. The president's attitude toward the investigation was understandably negative, yet the president did not use his authority to close the investigation. He asked his lawyer if Mr. Mueller had conflicts that disqualified Mr. Mueller from the job, but he did not shut down the investigation. The president knew he was innocent. Those are the facts of the Mueller report. Russia meddled in the 2016 election, the president did not conspire with the Russian, and nothing we hear today will change those facts. But one element of this story remains, the beginnings of the FBI investigation into the president. I look forward to Mr. Mueller's testimony about what he found during his review of the origins of the investigation. In addition, the Inspector General continues to review how baseless gossip can be used to launch an FBI investigation against a private citizen and eventually a president. Those results will be released, and we will need to learn from them to ensure government intelligence and law enforcement powers are never again used and turned on a private citizen or a potential or political candidate as a result of the political leanings of a handful of FBI agents. The origins and conclusions of the Mueller investigation are the same things, what it means to be American. Every American has a voice in our democracy, so it must protect the sanctity of their voice by combating election interference. Every American enjoys the presumption of innocence and guarantee of due process. If we carry anything away today, it must be that we increase our vigilance against foreign election interference while we ensure our government officials don't weaponize their power against the constitutional rights guaranteed to every U.S. citizen. Finally, we must agree that the opportunity cost here is too high. The months we have spent investigating from this dais failed to end the border crisis or contribute to the growing job market. Instead, we have gotten stuck, and it's paralyzed this committee and this House. And as a side note, every week I leave my family and kids, the most important things to me, to come to this place because I believe this place is a place where we can actually do things and help people. 6.5 years ago, I came here to work on behalf of the people of the 9th District in this country. And we accomplished a lot in those first 6 years on a bipartisan basis with many of my friends across the aisle sitting on this dais with me today. However, this year, because the majority's dislike of this president and the endless hearing into a closed investigation have caused us to accomplish nothing except talk about the problems of our country while our border is on fire and in crisis and everything else is stopped. This hearing is long overdue. We have had truth for months. No American conspired to throw our election. What we need today is to let that truth bring us confidence and, I hope, Mr. Chairman, closure. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. I will now introduce today's witness. Robert Mueller served as director of the FBI from 2001 to 2013, and most recently served as special counsel in the Department of Justice, overseeing the investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 special election. He received his BA from Princeton University, an MA from New York University in my district, and his JD from the University of Virginia. Mr. Mueller is accompanied by counsel Aaron Zebley, who served as deputy special counsel on the investigation. We welcome our distinguished witness, and we thank you for participating in today's hearing. Now, if you would please rise, I will begin by swearing you in. Would you raise your right hand, please? Left hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God? Let the record show the witness answered the affirmative. Thank you, and please be seated. Please note that your written statement will be entered into the record in its entirety. Accordingly, I ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes. Director Mueller, you may begin.
Good morning, Chairman Nadler, and Ranking Member Collins, and the members of the committee. As you know, in May 2017, the Acting Attorney General asked me to serve as special counsel. I undertook that role because I believed that it was of paramount interest to the nation to determine whether a foreign adversary had interfered in the presidential election. As the Acting Attorney General said at the time, the appointment was necessary in order for the American people to have full confidence in the outcome. My staff and I carried out this assignment with that critical objective in mind: to work quietly, thoroughly, and with integrity so that the public would have full confidence in the outcome. The order appointing me as special counsel directed our office to investigate Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election. This included investigating any links or coordination between the Russian government and individuals associated with the Trump campaign. It also included investigating efforts to interfere with or obstruct our investigation. Throughout the investigation, I continually stressed two things to the team that we had assembled. First, we needed to do our work as thoroughly as possible and as expeditiously as possible. It was in the public interest for our investigation to be complete, but not to last a day longer than was necessary. Second, the investigation needed to be conducted fairly and with absolute integrity. Our team would not leak or take other actions that could compromise the integrity of our work. All decisions were made based on the facts and the law. During the course of our investigation, we charged more than 30 defendants with committing federal crimes, including 12 officers of the Russian military. 7 defendants have been convicted or pled guilty. Certain of the charges we brought remain pending today. And for those matters, I stress that the indictments contain allegations and every defendant is presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty. In addition to the criminal charges we brought, as required by Justice Department regulations, we submitted a confidential report to the Attorney General at the conclusion of our investigation. The report set forth the results of our work and the reasons for our charging and declination decisions. The Attorney General later made the report largely public. As you know, I made a few limited remarks about our report when we closed the special counsel's office in May of this year. But there are certain points that bear emphasis. First, our investigation found that the Russian government interfered in our election in sweeping and systematic fashion. Second, the investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired with the Russian government in its election interference activities. We did not address collusion, which is not a legal term. Rather, we focused on whether the evidence was sufficient to charge any member of the campaign with taking part in a criminal conspiracy, and it was not. Third, our investigation of efforts to obstruct the investigation and lie to investigators was of critical importance. Obstruction of justice strikes at the core of the government's effort to find the truth and to hold wrongdoers accountable. Finally, as described in Volume 2 of our report, we investigated a series of actions by the President towards the investigation. Based on Justice Department policy and principles of fairness, we decided we would not make a determination as to whether the President committed a crime. That was our decision then, and it remains our decision today. Let me say a further word about my appearance today. It is unusual for a prosecutor to testify about a criminal investigation. And given my role as a prosecutor, there are reasons why my testimony will necessarily be limited. First, public testimony could affect several ongoing matters. In some of these matters, court rules or judicial orders limit the disclosure of information to protect the fairness of the proceedings. And consistent with long-standing Justice Department policy, it would be inappropriate for me to comment in any way that could affect an ongoing matter. Second, the Justice Department has asserted privileges concerning investigative information and decisions, ongoing matters within the Justice Department, and deliberations within our office. These are Justice Department privileges that I will respect. The Department has released a letter discussing the restrictions on my testimony. I therefore will not be able to answer questions about certain areas that I know are of public interest. For example, I am unable to address questions about the initial opening of the FBI's Russia investigation, which occurred months before my appointment, or matters related to the so-called Steele dossier. These matters are subject of ongoing review by the Department. Any questions on these topics should therefore be directed to the FBI or the Justice Department. As I explained when we closed the Special Counsel's office in May, our report contains our findings and analysis and the reasons for the decisions we made. We conducted an extensive investigation over 2 years. In writing the report, we stated the results of our investigation with precision. We scrutinized every word. I do not intend to summarize or describe the results of our work in a different way in the course of my testimony today. And as I said on May 29th, the report is my testimony, and I will stay within that text. And as I stated in May, I will not comment on the actions of the Attorney General or of Congress. I was appointed as a prosecutor, and I intend to adhere to that role and to the Department standards that govern it. I'll be joined today by Deputy Special Counsel Aaron Zebley. Mr. Zebley has extensive experience as a federal prosecutor and at the FBI, where he served as my Chief of Staff. And Mr. Zebley was responsible for the day-to-day oversight of the investigations conducted by our office. Now, I also want to again say thank you to the attorneys, the FBI agents, the analysts, the professional staff who helped us conduct this investigation in a fair and independent manner. These individuals who spent nearly 2 years working on this matter were of the highest integrity. And let me say one more thing. Over the course of my career, I have seen a number of challenges to our democracy. The Russian government's effort to interfere in our election is among the most serious. And as I said on May 29th, this deserves the attention of every American. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We will now proceed under the 5-minute rule with questions. I will begin by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. Director Mueller, the President has repeatedly claimed that your report found there was no obstruction and that it completely and totally exonerated him. But that is not what your report said, is it?
Correct. It is not what the report said.
And now, reading from page 2 of volume 2 of your report,